Mitchell and I go way back, and so this is really special. I'm curious, I just want to gauge the audience. How many of you have used a product, a HashiCorp product that Mitchell has built? Wow. Yeah. Well, so I'm Yana. I was lucky enough to start working with Mitchell and HashiCorp pretty early, and so I was doing community, so I was able to see a lot of the things. But something that just really impressed me, and I think impressed a lot of us, is you and Armand were such such product visionaries. And even like when we were 10 or 20 people, we already had 6 open source projects. We launched Nomad and Auto. Like, how did you already have like a view of the world back then?
And I think this is important for a lot of founders. We took this this perspective when we started HashiCorp, which is that there was a certain trend that we saw the world moving to without us, which was cloud. And it's funny to say that now because it's like a very obvious accepted thing, but it was very much, we had some VC meetings then that were like, maybe cloud won't work out. But that was like the trend that was happening without us. And then we decided we had this worldview of how people would interact with cloud. And we were going to build for that worldview and either convince the world to wrap around that to some extent, not like wholly, but directionally, or we would rather fail. And I think that that was based actually on an experience that Armand and I both had in college where, of all people, for faults and his successes and faults, we watched this talk by Steve Ballmer, came and visited us, and he talked about how like it's better to have a singular direction and move in that direction and fail than to move in a bunch of different directions and look down at your feet and realize you didn't move anywhere. And so we were like, our singular direction is cloud, multi-cloud, infrastructure as code, like all these little, things that became buzzwords. And we just tried to push towards that. So we had this very fixed sort of roadmap. We had to adapt to things like Docker that didn't exist when we started the company, and Kubernetes eventually popped up and things like that. So there was obviously adaptations and pivoting that had to happen at various points, but it's still the core fundamental direction we wanted to head didn't change. And I think that's the thing where I say the world does have to move with you to a certain extent. Like if the world went a different direction, we would have just failed, even if our ideas we thought were good. That happens all the time to founders. But we got lucky that the world sort of headed in that direction, and I believe we built, not all of them, but a lot of good products that worked out.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And then, you're such a hacker, a technologist, like you're just an engineer at heart. How did you, as the company started growing, how did you like rewire your brain? And like, what were some like lessons that you learned?
Yeah, well, first you stop coding. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. Yeah, that'd be funny. No. I think what's really important for technical founders, the aha for me was realizing, I viewed software as my tool to solve all problems. There's a couple points here, that one. And, a lot of problems are human and not technical. And so there is a lot that you have to solve that way. But as an engineer, you could look at them as engineering problems. So, for example, a company is a machine. You are engineering a machine. The machine in the VC sort of capital sense is a money machine. You put in, an investor puts in $1 and gets whatever, $1.15 out the other side. That's like the 10,000, like you're in space view of what a company is. But it is a machine, and every role and org and how you build your company is, I started to view it as how does data flow through the machine? When a customer hits a website, like how does that flow through the machine? When engineer or a product manager has an idea for a feature, how does that flow through the machine? And how does that ultimately reach a customer's infrastructure? And I don't know, we like to map it out that way. And then it becomes, at least for me, it became more fun because I love engineering. And then I was like, I'm engineering a people machine. And I started to compartmentalize various problems that way. So I think that's an important thing to realize is not all of those problems, a lot of those problems can't be solved with software. And so you have to really go in and do the non-technical work in order to make that happen.
Yeah, that's really beautifully said. And again, it was so I mean, I got to experience those different shifts that you and Armand made throughout that, and how you all matured. And
we made a lot of broken machines.
yeah, exactly. And that's the next thing, right? And during our dry run, you mentioned like grieving some things that you had to let go as a founder. And what were some of those things that you had to like let go over time as the company grew and scaled?
Yeah, and there, you know, one thing Armand and I always did, and we tend to just, it worked out. We did this on a quarterly basis. That's just like an arbitrary choice. Is we would look at the company and look at all the decisions that had happened over the past quarter. You know, that the cadence between the meetings, and we try to identify the things where it's like, where did we really slow things down? Where as founders were we the bottleneck in what was happening? And we never wanted to be that, because there's so much for a founder to do. There's so much they're involved in. You want to be able to build this organization of autonomy and trust in order to get things done. But the other side of that coin is that you are yielding control because you're trusting. So you're yielding control. And that, for me in particular, that's really hard. And so, you know, in every aspect of the company that happened, and it was painful in every aspect of the company.
Like, what was the decision to bring in an external CEO and become like co-CTO?
So we brought in a CEO kind of uniquely around 2 years into the company. Our revenue at the time was less than $500,000 ARR. I mean, it was nothing it was not a good time to hire a CEO generally. But sort of what we identified, I think there's a few important points. One, I just didn't like the job. There was another person who gave a talk. I think it was the post-hog folks that gave a talk, but talked about like you need to find what you enjoy as a founder. And so that was one thing, is I realized, you know, at a certain point, CEO becomes a very real defined job with very specific responsibilities. And I realized very seriously, I was waking up every morning and I did not want to go to work, and that had never happened before, and that was a really big red flag. The other part of it is something a VC told me, one of our VCs, which was, you know, a VC invests on paper, startups are very, very likely to fail. And so when somebody invests in you, it's because they identify some property of you or your idea or something that is going to separate you from that mean. And for us, it was not my CEOing ability or charisma or any of that. It was very product and engineering oriented. So every moment I was spending away from that thinking was regressing us back to the mean of being more likely to be in the bucket of startups that didn't make it. And so I thought about that, and with Armand, thought, okay, if we find the right person that we could trust, could we bring someone in that would allow us to delegate this stuff, enjoy my work more, but also allow me and Armand to work on the things that put us in a more highly likely to succeed bucket. And that was sort of the decision making. I think that the CEO is a big, very public, visible one, but I would think that way about all sorts of stuff along the way, marketing, sales, all these things that I had to yield control of.
Yeah, something that I always thought you and Armand were so good about is being self-aware. Right, you knew the things you were good at, and so bringing Dave, an external CEO, in, he has an accounting background, he had a marketing background, right? So he helped really build out the different departments and the different like segments of the business, which was great. And then I don't know if you all read this, but Mitchell wrote a blog post about his decision to step away from the co-CTO and become an IC, and it's actually really funny. Quinn was like, "Don't stop coding," and I feel like that blog post like broke the internet, and everyone was like, wow, I can be an IC. I don't have to, like, it was really like a revolutionary notion.
It was revolutionary, but it's different. It's different. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that, again, like that's the sort of stuff that makes the company special, right? And that's not true for every company. That was true for ours, but I think it's true for a lot, where your, as a founder, product and engineering prowess differentiates things. And I think a lot of companies, when you stop coding that and you get into the later stages, you're losing that. And I sort of recognized, I felt at least, that the company was losing that. And I wanted to personally go back to it, but I also wanted to sort of like light a fire under certain things and be like, this is how I'm going to do things differently. And I think it is important, if you're that person, to keep it up.
We were also talking about in the dry run about how you used to be like fearless and used to take a lot more risks. I'd love to learn a bit more about that. Like how did that shift happen? And how could you have avoided it, right? Because you talked about like Toby and Guillermo from Vercel, how you're like, oh, they're still.
Yeah, this is one of my regrets. And I think it's something that, at least from my perspective, HashiCorp failed at or I failed at, I don't know. But, you know, I think the first, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, like we were totally fearless. I didn't care what anybody said. I didn't care what the public internet feedback was. We just did what we thought was right, and we built a certain way, and some people got on board and other people were appalled, and we just did it. And at a certain point in the company, it's not like overnight. It's just something I realized later. My mentality shifted where I got very fearful. I suddenly was fearful of all the time and energy we had put into this and it all being a waste. I was fearful of seeing all these employees around me and what if they didn't have a job at a certain point because we weren't making the right decisions, and customers that we had, and if I change this direction, are we going to lose them as customers? But more importantly, on the human side, are we going to lose their trust? And I just, every decision, it shifted where I viewed it from a position of fear rather than a position of confidence. And even as I recognized that and started course correcting, it felt like it crept into the core of how things worked in the company and the process and the frameworks and blah, blah, blah. And so one thing I recognize these companies. I feel like I don't know the inner workings of these companies, so I'm just talking purely from an outsider. But it seems like, you know, companies like Vercel with Guillermo, Shopify with Toby, they're doing a much better job at a much larger scale, at least Shopify at a much larger scale, of keeping this sort of fearless motion going. And so when I talk to early stage founders, I try to just encourage them to, you know, don't get paralyzed by fear. Don't let that seep in. There's a lot of scary things happening around you, but like, you know, all your early success is because of the fearlessness. And so sort of like keep that going.
Yeah. Well, at least from an employee perspective, it always felt like you were all trying to make the best decisions for the company and for the employees, and you built a really incredible culture. Like I think about all the early employees, like how many of us were still there at the time of the IPO. So thank you for that, and I can't imagine the pressure.
And most at the IPO, most early employees, there was only a handful that had ever left. But yeah, it was just, you know, I think early on it was almost selfish, but I think it would have worked out not selfish. Early on it was, I don't care if we fail, because me personally, I'll just go work for Google or something. Or, you know, like you have this naive, young, sort of maybe rude arrogance about like how like it doesn't matter. I didn't have a family, wasn't married, no kids, no house, nothing. Like nothing mattered, right? Like all that mattered was I was just going to focus on the vision, and failure was fine. And then it shifted. And it shifts a lot even before I had a family or anything, just because of the employees that worked there. It shifts a lot. And yeah, I think if I could go back in time, I would reorient my thinking around that.
I think that's actually a really nice shift to community, and something that Josh, SketchDev, mentioned earlier about culture and people, and how that's like really important to wire early on into the company. How did you all approach that? Because I mean, we all experienced it.
From the employee side?
Yeah, employee side, because I also felt like that was kind of how we treated the community as well.
Yeah, from the employee side, again, this was part of the post-hog talk, but they talked about principles, and I think for us that was very important. I think you were there. I think it was around 5 employees that Armand and I put together the principles of HashiCorp, and you know, a lot of companies, and we said this then, a lot of companies throw principles up on the wall because it's kind of like an HR check mark or something. But we tried to write down things that were basically, you know, how we act, how we behave. And it's like who are the people we want to work with? It's like the people that act like this. And so we put that down, and we really, up to when I left, all the way through, constantly reiterated those. And I think that was one huge success, was we did keep that pretty strong. And I think it's about building those frameworks in place. It wasn't, you can never ad hoc say what our culture was. Like the culture was obvious. The culture was in writing. The culture was from 5 employees onwards. It was like there. And so I think that, and then, yeah, that's how we treated people external to the company too. But yeah.
No, we lived and breathed those principles at every new onboarding. For years, Armand would be at every new onboarding going through the principles.
I've still never heard, I mean, maybe someone here knows, I've still never heard of a founder, it wasn't me, Armand did it, that, yeah, he onboarded individually, personally, every single employee through. He had a personal goal of reaching 2,000 employees, and we reached 2,000 employees, and he kept doing it. So by the time I left, he was still doing it. So yeah.
And that's why I love the post-hog founders mentioned that they interview every employee. And I think, I don't know if that scales, but like to really keep the culture and the bar of hiring, I think that's important. Switching to community, I mean, HashiCorp is such a model for like open source and building a really strong community. What do you think we did really early on that kind of helped build, and how did it scale?
Yeah, I think at least 10 years ago, I think it was a very differentiating factor of ours was the community, and something I took really seriously. So one of the reasons Armand was onboarding everyone and I wasn't was because I was trying to spend personal time with members of the community that weren't customers, weren't ever going to be customers. And I thought that, he was onboarding employees, I was onboarding the community. I think one thing that I feel like is sort of lost today is it was really personal. And for whatever reason, I really can't pinpoint it on one thing. I think COVID did have a big impact in shifting this, but if everything around product and DevRel and community events and stuff with technical tools feels a lot less personal, like your interaction with people, I'll flip it the other way. At HashiCorp, like at these community events, you would always interact directly with me or an engineer on the team. There was not a DevRel person. There was not like people in the middle. It was directly with these people that worked on the product. And I think, and also it was generally with smaller companies. And I think it's sort of, I will point blame that I think the big companies, Amazon, Google, et cetera, poisoned the well a little bit because they sort of figured out the strategy and started sort of systematizing it. I remember at a certain point realizing that Amazon was just like paying for DevRel to go to literally every single event and be present. And I think that lowers the authenticity, not because of the people they're sending, but because there's people in the middle of what you're trying to reach. And we were at that point where you would go to a developer event and 100% of the speakers were just the people who built the product. Like that was who it really was. There was no marketing happening. It was just people passionate about what they were building, sharing what they were building. And I think that makes a big difference. And I think it makes a big difference in terms of like loyalty as well. There was, as better products came out, as competitors came out, I think we were able to retain this really strong, like, no, but we want the HashiCorp tool to work because like you're connecting to people. You don't really connect to products. Like I have no problem switching from one product to another. I have no loyalty to a product. But if I know the people that work on the product, I have more loyalty to a human than the product. And actually in the AI world, I feel this a lot right now. I know Quinn and I know SourceGraph, so actually I'm really excited about AMP. But as much as I like the other tools in the space, and I've interacted with, community people, I don't know who's working on it. I've never met anyone, so like I'll switch. I don't care. I don't feel that way about that. And I think that's really important so the point is community should be authentic, and I think community is human. So that's what I'm trying to make.
Yeah. And it was loyalty more to like you and Armand and the engineering team, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. It is always human.
I think something that made my job a little bit easier at HashiCorp was community was ingrained in everything we did, right? From how like customer success responded to a ticket to, right? Because when Mitchell open sourced his first project, Vagrant, he was like, oh, I don't have a lot of downloads. But then once he started like posting on Twitter and being more public and speaking at meetups and conferences, right? So he learned how to grow open source projects. So it was already, we had kind of the framework ingrained, and then we got to.
Yeah, and early on, I think support is a really good example. Support honestly pisses me off all the time. Not at HashiCorp. I mean, yes, at HashiCorp, but everywhere. And it feels so impersonal. And early on at HashiCorp, this feels a little bit like Big Brothery, but I would watch every single support interaction, and I would, metaphorically, we were remote, so metaphorically, I would like tap on the shoulder of the support person and be like, don't talk to them that way. I worked at the Apple Store in college, retail, and they always talked about, they taught you this thing. Of course, it was an acronym, Apple, because it's like a cult.
HashiCorp wasn't? Kind of felt a little bit.
We tried.
That big glowing H we always had at our conferences.
Very church-like. But at Apple, one of the first things you did before you sold someone a device was they taught you to learn more about that person, empathize with the problem they're trying to solve, because there was no commission or anything at the Apple Store. So it was like really you wanted to sell them the correct device for their needs. Because a lot of people come in and just say, I want this computer. This is exactly what I want. And they could be wrong, and then they get a bad taste of the whole company. So yeah, there was a lot of support requests that came in that was like, this is my problem. And it's like, here's a solution. And the solution's good, but I always try to encourage people to like, learn about this person. Like, what do they do? Why are they solving this? Are they happy? Empathize a little bit. And we lost that as we scaled up, but I think we would be better. It obviously scales to like a retail level of Apple, right? Like, I think we would be better if all interactions were that way. And I think it builds loyalty. It pays off from a company perspective, but it's also just like a good thing to do.
Yeah. And how do you think the community and the DevGuild playbooks have changed from when we were doing community to today?
Oh, it's totally different. Weekly I talk to new founders. It's where I spend most of my time right now is talking to founders, advising companies, things like that. And weekly I'll talk to people that's like, oh, I want to learn and copy like the HashiCorp playbook. And I'm like, nope, light it all on fire. Like it doesn't work anymore. The world is different. The world has changed. None of it will be successful anymore. And so, but I think like the abstract nature of it is still right? Like connect with people, build that loyalty, build something exciting, build something that when people use it, hopefully they smile, things like that. Don't be gross. Just really basic things. But the medium by which you disseminate that information is totally different now. It used to be in-person conferences. You just talk directly to people. Now there's a lot of, media involved in it, a lot of attention grabbing, things like that. A little bit different, but I think if you focus on this, you could do attention grabbing in a non-slimy way if you focus on those like core ideas, basically. Gen Zers? Yeah. The joke I tell people is just hire someone, Gen Z, who agrees with your philosophy, and just let them go. Just let them go, do it. It works really well. But no, like the serious thing is, it matters where you are sort of in the understanding of the zeitgeist. But I've found, especially with the open source that I work on now, a lot more success by literally having these college students. And, as long as you set the boundaries of like no insulting people, no this sort of wording, whatever, like just go off and do it. And it works. Like it works to get attention.
I mean, just the playbooks are changing so much, right? We're watching all these AI companies, how they do like kind of like direct to consumer, or they do these like launch videos. So it's so different from when we were doing things.
Way different.
Yeah. I now kind of want to shift to, we started as an open source company and then had to make the shift, right, to building out go-to-market, building products.
Yeah.
There's lots of things into that, but how did we make the shift from being a purely open source and then figuring out how to kind of build products? And
yeah, I think this applies. It's a very general application, whether you're open source or not. Is just you need to solve a real problem, and a real shift that I had to come up with was solve. As an engineer, I understood the technical problems we were solving, and the most annoying question I would get asked, and I should have realized earlier on that it was a signal that I should be learning something rather than being annoyed by something. Was people would be like, yeah, but what what solution is this for a customer? And I'm like, what do you mean? What is the solution? Like the problem is infrastructure automation, and the solution is an automation tool for infrastructure. Like it's so obvious, like what you're trying to do. But realizing that, I guess the way technical people look at problem solutions is different from a way a non-technical or not as deeply technical buyer looks at problems and solutions. They're looking at it from an organizational perspective or from an industry trend perspective. I think Quinn put up a really good quote, which is like, they have a mandate to ship AI. What does that mean? Like, what does that mean? And so like, but it doesn't matter. They have that mandate. You as an AI company need to be in the conversation to be a solution for that mandate. And so you need to have the right white papers and the right marketing copy and the right like, you're speaking the right language to those people. And it took me a little bit too long to figure that out. I always thought it was a bug that when I went to like VMware's website, I had no fucking clue what they were talking about, the whole thing. And then I realized it's a feature because a lot of people do understand that and they spend a lot of money. And so suddenly our website, I would visit our own website and be like, I have no idea what's going on. What are we selling? But it was working. And so the point is, I think, again, this is part of that like technical founder transition, is learning to speak the right language for the different people that you're interacting with. And it's not the way they're thinking about the problem isn't wrong. It's just different, and it's a different scope, and it's a different challenge that they're trying to solve. So that, I think, is super important.
And we had to learn, right? Like, we were very close to our open source users. You know, they were all developers, and then like the language that we used, right, to market our open source projects were so different from the language we had to use for enterprise. And we had to learn, right, what were the enterprises needing? Like, what did we need to solve for them? And then how do we use the language that they will understand?
A big part of it was making enterprises aware that this was a problem that needed to be solved, I guess. You know, one thing that really stuck out in my mind was Terraform. When we first started talking to analysts, put us in some category. It might have been configuration management, but I was like, this isn't the right category. But there was no cloud automation category or anything that fit better. So they just put us into that. And the problem was in 2015 that configuration management as a category was not a priority for executives. And so, Fortune 500 executives, these buyers, these decision makers would go to conferences, would talk socially amongst each other and all these things. And when we came in, they had never heard of us. Their developers had heard of us. But when they started looking into it, pulling reports, whatever, be like, oh, it's in this category. Not a priority right now. And we were like, that was really hurting our sales process. And then eventually, through a lot of our pushing, but through the market as well, Gartner introduced the cloud automation category and instantly put us at like the top of that category. And cloud automation became like I think it might have been multi-cloud automation, I don't know, but it was relevant. And that became suddenly an executive problem that needed to be solved within a defined timeline. And like overnight, sales process became a lot simpler. And the learning there was really how, in some cases, not grounded in reality the buying cycle is, or what people are buying. It's grounded in what is safe and what analysts are saying and what's not going to get you fired. And like, yeah, it's trends for sure, and being part of that trend. But like, yeah, you need to be part of the conversation. And so we started spending a lot more money, a lot more time. I hated every minute of this, but a lot more time on phone calls with analysts, doing a lot of analyst relations stuff, going to all their conferences. You just needed to be relevant just to show up on the radar, so that when you were clearly, in our opinion, the right technical product to buy, the buyer felt safe making that decision and buying it. What
about the discovery of importance of steak dinners and going golfing?
I think I tweeted this. I don't know. It's like there's an irrational. It's so irrationally effective to have dinner with somebody, as a distributed remote company and as an engineer who didn't want to leave my house, it was so annoying. But we would, I realized with enterprise sales in particular, and maybe this is all wrong, and this is changing from what Quinn said, but I realized how I used to make fun of these people that would fly on an airplane just to have one meeting and just like go back home. And then, next thing you know, I'm on a flight to Germany for 2 hours, and literally the same calendar day I'm on a flight back home. And it's like, what's the waste? But you spend that money in carbon footprint, but then you get a 7-figure deal done. And it required the dinner to push that over with a founder or a high level person. And it just sort of this the enterprise sales process, I feel like, is still very human oriented. I don't think you're going to click and sell these large deals anytime soon. And so you really need to build that relationship, build that trust, build that partnership. I think that's something we pushed a lot, was like, we weren't trying to just be a vendor. We were trying to be a partner we wanted to be the company that any sort of cloud problem they had, they could ask us, and we could be like, yeah, we don't do that, but I would look at these people. And we wanted to be the second person they called after Amazon or Google or whoever, and build that level of trust, because that leads to these large organizational wide like sales deals. And a big part of that is just, the irrational effectiveness of steak dinners, terrible steak dinners.
And closing piece, like what's one piece, looking back, what's one piece of advice you would give really early stage founders, maybe even, before they found a product?
Distilling it to one is not possible. I mean, I think the most important thing is the fearless thing I talked about. That's I think my number one regret about everything. It's just stay fearless, and you're here because you're funded presumably already, and you have this idea. People believe in you. You believe in yourself. Like, just stick to that. Adapt to the changing world and everything changing very quickly. But be fearless in that adaptation and just dive for it. I think that's really important because that's what separates startups from non-startups. And HashiCorp and other later stage companies start falling into that bucket where they start turning into big companies. And I used to think that big companies couldn't move fast because they were incompetent, and I learned that that's not true. There's like a ton of competent people at every company I ever went to. Was filled with them, really. The problem is that the system bogs you down, the fear, the risk, that all bogs you down. Like, if you just decide to trust and move and take that risk, that's the difference with a startup. So lean into that.
Well, thank you for sharing this advice, Mitchell.
Thanks.
Great.